A doctor secretly drugged civilians with LSD and watched what happened. A government let 400 men suffer from a curable disease, on purpose. And a war that killed over 1 million people may have started with a lie that never happened. People called these stories paranoid fantasies. Then the documents came out. These are the conspiracy theories that turned out to be true. I'm Dark Vault, and you're about to see how far the truth can be buried before it claws its way back out. In the early 1950s, the CIA had one fear that kept them up at night. What if the enemy could control the human mind? Rumor said Soviet and Chinese agents were brainwashing American prisoners during the Korean War. If that was true, the US needed to understand mind control first. So in 1953, the CIA launched a program they called MKUltra. The goal was simple and horrifying. Find a way to control a person's thoughts, memories, and free will. They started with a drug that seemed perfect for the job: LSD. Researchers gave the drug to soldiers, prisoners, mental patients, and sex workers. Almost none of them knew what they were being given. Some were dosed without their knowledge at all, slipped into drinks at parties the CIA quietly funded. One of those parties belonged to a chemist named Frank Olson. He had no idea his drink had been spiked. Within minutes he was disoriented. Within days he was spiraling. 9 days later, Olson fell from a 13th floor window in New York City. The CIA called it a suicide. His family wasn't so sure. But LSD wasn't the only tool. Researchers used sensory deprivation, electroshock, and prolonged isolation, all designed to break a person down and rebuild their mind from scratch. At McGill University, a psychiatrist took it even further. Patients who came in for simple anxiety were put into drug-induced comas for weeks. While they slept, recorded messages played on a loop, repeating the same phrases for days at a time. The doctor called it psychic driving. Most of those patients were never the same again. For 2 decades, this continued. No consent. No oversight. No accountability. Then, in 1973, the CIA director got nervous. He ordered every MKUltra file destroyed. For a while, it worked. The program vanished from history. People who whispered about CIA mind control were dismissed as cranks. But not every file got destroyed. In 1977, a government clerk found a box of financial records that had been misfiled, separate from the rest. 20,000 documents survived. When journalists got their hands on them, the cover story collapsed. The Senate launched an investigation. Survivors came forward. The CIA had to admit, under oath, that the program was real. They had drugged American citizens without consent for 20 years, and they almost got away with erasing it completely. In 1932, 400 black men in rural Alabama were told they were getting free healthcare. They weren't. The US Public Health Service approached these men with a simple offer: free medical exams, free meals, and burial insurance, just for participating in a study. What the men weren't told is that many of them already had syphilis, and the government knew it. The real goal of the study had nothing to do with treatment. Researchers wanted to watch what happens when syphilis is left completely untreated, from the first symptoms to the final stages of the disease. They called it the Tuskegee study. And it was never about helping anyone. For years, men suffered blindness, organ failure, mental decline. Researchers documented every stage like it was a science experiment, because to them, it was. Then in 1947, everything changed, except for these men. Penicillin was discovered as a cure for syphilis. Hospitals across the country started treating patients immediately. The men in the study got nothing. Researchers didn't just withhold the cure. They actively worked to make sure these men never found out a cure existed. They blocked them from other clinics. They lied about their diagnosis. Some men were told they had bad blood, a vague term that explained nothing and concealed everything. The study was supposed to last 6 months. It lasted 40 years. Throughout that time, multiple doctors and nurses raised concerns internally. They were ignored. The study continued through World War II, through the Korean War, through the entire civil rights movement, while the men who started it as young adults grew old and many of them died, never knowing the disease eating away at their bodies had a cure sitting in every hospital in the country. It finally ended in 1972, not because the government had a change of heart, but because a whistleblower leaked it to the press. The story made the front page. The public was horrified. Congress held hearings. The survivors and families sued, and the government settled for $10 million. But money couldn't undo for decades of deception. In 1997, President Clinton issued a formal apology, on behalf of the United States government, to men most of whom were already gone. The most disturbing part isn't that it happened once. It's that it was allowed to continue for 40 years, in plain sight, with federal funding, while the men who trusted their government paid for that trust with their lives. What if a government could manufacture a fake attack on its own people, just to justify a war it already wanted? In 1962, a group of US military leaders proposed exactly that. It was called Operation Northwoods. And the plan was staggering in its scope. The Joint Chiefs of Staff drafted a proposal to stage fake terrorist attacks on American soil and blamed them on Cuba. The ideas included blowing up a US ship and lying about who did it, faking the hijacking of a passenger plane, and even staging funerals with fabricated victims, all to manufacture public outrage and justify an invasion of Cuba. The plan went all the way to the Secretary of Defense's desk. President Kennedy rejected it. Operation Northwoods was buried, and for 30 years, almost nobody knew it had ever existed. It surfaced only in 1997, when the documents were declassified, and people read in black and white that senior military officials had seriously proposed deceiving the American public into war. If they were willing to draft that plan, the question became impossible to ignore. Did something like it actually happen somewhere else? In 1964, the US Navy reported that North Vietnamese boats attacked the USS Maddox in the Gulf of Tonkin. Then, 2 days later, they reported a second attack on the same ship. President Johnson went on national television and called it unprovoked aggression. Congress responded almost immediately. They passed a resolution giving the president sweeping power to escalate military action in Vietnam, without a formal declaration of war. That resolution became the legal foundation for one of the deadliest wars in American history. But for years, something didn't add up. The crew on the Maddox reported confusing radar signals and uncertain visual contact. Some sailors said they never actually saw an enemy boat at all. Decades later, declassified National Security Agency documents confirmed it. The second attack never happened. It was a false signal, misread radar, weather interference, and panic that the government repackaged as an act of war. By the time the truth came out, over 58,000 American soldiers had died in Vietnam, along with more than 1 million Vietnamese civilians and soldiers. A war that shaped a generation may have escalated because of an attack that was never real, built on top of a doctrine that had already been drafted, tested, and silently shelved 2 years earlier. 3 different decades. 3 different governments. The same pattern, every time. Deny it. Bury it. Wait for the public to stop asking. And for years, it worked. The people who suspected the truth were called paranoid. The people who lived through it were called liars. It took whistleblowers, leaked files, and investigative reporters willing to risk everything just to drag these stories into the light. Here's the part that should actually stay with you. Every one of these programs started small. A research grant. A military proposal. A radar blip that got misread. Nobody signs off on a 40-year cover-up on day one. They sign off on the first lie, and then the next one becomes a little easier to tell. So the next time something sounds too extreme to be true, remember, that's exactly what people said about all 3 of these. And they were wrong. If you want to go deeper into the stories history tried to bury, the next vault is already waiting. Subscribe, and I'll see you inside.